And so what we had was a system that tried to change those economic relations between men and men, and making it very, very clear that men had to dominate, as well as being extracted out of the rural economies to go and serve it. So you had a gendered structure of a system of labor here, which basically meant that in terms of the governing system, in terms of government, women also became marginalized, right? You have a system where women are very much part and parcel of the economic system, right? Their labor contributes to subsistence, and then we wake up and find that now they are marginalized. They're supposed to stay in rural areas, look after babies, and people even forget that what they are doing is producing use values.
Sorry, Dr. Selolwane.
I have 5 minutes.
No, I forgot to mention that this is gender, so it gets more time.
Oh.
Please proceed, you have 5 minutes.
We don't want to be... Right. So now when we talk about what is happening now, I think some of the questions we ought to be asking ourselves is, we've seen what has happened, from independence to now in terms of the marginalization of women. We have seen how by the 1990s, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, it became very, very fashionable for Western countries to promote the democracy that they had worked so tirelessly to undermine throughout post-independence, the post-independence period. Now, having done that, now they become the saviors of the world, demanding that our governments become more accountable to their people, and remembering that these were governments in which there were female human beings as well, and that they should be brought onto. And then you could argue that given the dominance that the Western countries and institutions made in terms of being the champions of democracy, that in fact what they simply did was to ensure that many of these governments were assured of a check if in fact they brought about multi-party systems that had very, very little substance in terms of the extent to which they were representative of the people that were governed, particularly the women who were in the majority. So we had this cosmetic thing where women, it became fashionable to try and get women in the legislatures of African governments, where we know that is not really, for most countries, that is not really where the power actually lies. Power actually lies in cabinet. But how many people actually pushed for the African cabinets and African political parties, in fact, to also have equitable gender representation? It was, you saw total silence in terms of the monitoring of, the gender dimension, that hardly anybody, actually, none of the international reports would actually even monitor how many women were very, very dominant in political parties. The political parties themselves became, they were not important. People just wanted political parties to happen without even looking at who leads these political parties, who is in cabinet. As long as people could sit, you could see skirts and nice dresses in parliament, people thought we had arrived. So now the question is, now with the new kids on the block, China and India, are we likely to see any major restructuring of gender relations? Are these kids on the block likely to bring into the capitalist system that is world dominant a new way of relations? Or are we going to see the similar relations based on race and gender that we have been all experiencing? We have certainly had economic liberalization, which has basically meant that a kind of integration of some regional economies, which basically still continues to marginalize women. When you look at how many, the people who are coming to Africa, when Blessing was to South Africa, when Blessing was saying there is a scramble for South Africa, in fact there is. There has been since the ending of formal apartheid, that many Africans fleeing from economic collapse and political repression in their own countries have been coming here seeking greener pastures. Now you look at the structure, 3 minutes, you look at the structure of that. When the women come here, they come here into which types of jobs? What about the men? Many, you know, when you look at the various classes, in fact, the top jobs where you find men coming here as entrepreneurs, you know, from Nigeria, they are men, yeah? And then, of course, you'll have male laborers also, cheap labor. But the women predominantly would be occupying low jobs. And then you look at the other way, where South Africa, you know, you could argue that South Africa is going out into Africa to save Africa from being ignored by the Western world, providing capital where nobody is particularly impressed with Africans. So in a sense, a very welcome intrusion, as it were, of South Africa actually becoming an African country and therefore a partner in the restructuring of the collapsed economies in sub-Saharan Africa. But when South Africa goes to the rest of Africa, you are seeing also South Africa reproducing itself in terms of the racial structure of the economy. Many Africans will complain to you how the apartheid system, which within South Africa, the South Africans consistently try to undo, in fact gets replicated in other parts of Africa without any particular mechanism of pushing it back. So the top of business, totally white, middle business, management, colored, and then the rest of black Africa right at the bottom there. Similarly with the gender dimension, where, you know, the women consistently are. And this is a country, South Africa, that fights so hard for gender equality, and yet does nothing about both the government of South Africa assisting other African countries and business from South Africa going into the rest of Africa, insisting on the things that they consider very good. Where is gender representation here? Where is women in? Once they leave the shores of South Africa, you know, it's everybody for himself or for herself this time, and God for us all. Which has happened also with Western countries when they came to colonize, when America took the lead in terms of decolonization and thingy zero time. Let me wind up there. I mean, you had a system where in America it was okay to be democratic, but outside America it was totally uneconomic. South Africa is basically replicating the same thing. It's fine to be gender conscious here in South Africa, but the minute you cross the Limpopo, it doesn't matter.
Thank you.